It began in stillness, not the loud kind, the stillness that echoes behind closed windows on a rainy afternoon, when the world is distant and the body finally sits without the need to move. That's where I started, with a quiet morning and a worn notebook, where I scribbled the first thought that would shape the next 30 days. What if I lost it all? Negative visualization, the Stoics called it. A daily descent into the possibility of loss, not to wallow in misery, but to soften the mind, to cradle gratitude, not in fantasy, but in reality's shadow. The premise was simple. Each day, I would imagine something I loved, someone, some place, some comfort, and picture life without it, not to dwell in fear, but to rehearse the fragility of everything I touch, to walk through the halls of my life and notice the doors that might one day close. On day one, I imagined the loss of time, not all of it, just a year, stolen somehow, swallowed by illness or misdirection. I sat with that vision. Days grayed out, opportunities missed, a version of myself waking up one morning, realizing a year had passed while he was asleep inside it. And strangely, the effect wasn't panic. It wasn't regret. It was attention. That afternoon, I watched light crawl up my kitchen wall, like it had something to say. I chewed my food slower, let music finish its sentences, as if I had, somehow, found the edges of time. The first week unfolded like fog, every day a different loss. A parent's voice silenced, the warmth of a home turned cold, the body no longer capable of carrying its own weight, and with each imagined absence, something strange began to take root, a tenderness toward the ordinary, a reverence for repetition, the hum of appliances, the creak of the floorboard, the water turning hot in the shower like it always does. The practice was not easy. It was not romantic. There were mornings where the thought of imagining loss felt pointless, melodramatic, or cruel. But the Stoics weren't asking me to suffer. They were asking me to see, to sit in the richness of what is still here, to train my heart in the discipline of impermanence. Because comfort dulls awareness, familiarity folds life in on itself, and gratitude, when left unspoken, becomes assumption. By day 10, I began to notice the world differently, not through awe, but through weight, the weight of impermanence pressing against every corner of my day. A passing train wasn't just noise anymore. It was departure. A friend's laugh wasn't just sound. It was presence. I didn't enjoy things more. I just realized they were real, and that they could end. There's a certain sadness that creeps in when you do this work. Not depression, not despair, but a soft, persistent ache, like the hush before rain, or the breath before goodbye. And I didn't resist it. I let it come. This was the Stoic paradox. To become more resilient, you must feel more deeply. To be unmoved by chaos, you must first be moved by life. And so I kept going. I didn't search for epiphanies. I just returned each day to the practice of imagining loss and watching how it shaped the soil beneath my thoughts. Some days I imagined the small things, the grocery store down the street, my morning walk, the buzz of a streetlight outside my window. Other days, the heavy things, a life without purpose, a life without love, a life where everything I built had been washed away. And always, when I opened my eyes, I came back to this. It hasn't happened yet. You still have this. And that reminder, quiet, firm, unwavering, became the thread I followed through every day. Not joy, not ecstasy, but the grounded, steady rhythm of gratitude. Part 2. The Mirror of Absence. By the second week, the practice had carved a small chamber in my mind, a place I visited each morning before the world could interrupt. It wasn't sacred, it wasn't even comfortable, but it was quiet, and in that quiet, something subtle had shifted. I began to recognize how much I had mistaken having for deserving, as if love, health, or warmth were guaranteed, owed to me simply because I had grown used to them. The Stoics warned of this, that the more we cling to what is stable, the more we are shaken when it trembles. So instead they practiced letting go in advance. They practiced losing, not to be numb, but to be ready. One morning I sat with the thought of losing my voice, not metaphorically, truly, my ability to speak, to sing, to say anything aloud. I imagined the silence that would follow, the way I would listen more, the way words would gather dust in the attic of my skull, unspoken but still alive. And that day, every conversation tasted different, even small ones. The nod from a stranger, the hum of my own voice reading a passage out loud, the slight rasp in a friend's laugh, how it rose and fell like wind over gravel. The practice didn't always yield beauty. Some days it scraped at me. It made me tired or restless or cynical. Because there's something exhausting about always rehearsing grief. But even that was a kind of seeing. Because life is exhausting. Because grief doesn't wait for permission. And when it comes, it asks, were you paying attention? Did you know what you had? Did you let yourself feel it while it was still warm? There were moments when I wanted to skip the exercise, to return to comfort, to numbness, to the easy sleep of routine. But the practice doesn't work that way. It asks for your presence even when it's unpleasant. It asks you to bow your head before the altar of what might be taken. And gradually, this daily brush with absence started to color the shape of my days. I noticed I was reaching for less, not out of discipline, but because excess no longer made sense. The Stoics spoke of this too, how luxury becomes noise, how craving becomes its own cage. When you imagine losing a hot meal, you don't need 10. When you imagine losing the sun, a single hour of light becomes enough. The practice made me frugal, but not in money. Frugal in attention, in desire, in time. I began to see where I had been spilling hours like water, flicking them away on things that offered nothing back. Half-hearted distractions, empty scrolling, mindless reaching. But now, each minute had a faint hum beneath it, a reminder that it might be the last of its kind. And no, I wasn't transformed. I still wasted time, still forgot myself, still craved things I didn't need. But now there was a mirror, held gently in front of me each morning, a mirror made of absence, of what was no longer there, or might one day disappear. And in that mirror, I began to see not just the things I feared losing, but the things I had already lost. Old friends who drifted, moments I didn't cherish, versions of myself I never quite became. The practice was not a shield. It didn't protect me from sadness. It simply gave the sadness a name, a purpose, a place to sit. And when I welcomed it, when I stopped resisting the ache, I found that it softened something. Not my heart, my grip on control, on expectation, on the illusion that I could keep everything I loved from ever fading. The Stoics weren't pessimists. They were realists with open eyes. They looked at the world and said, "This is beautiful. And one day, it will be gone. So let me walk through it slowly. Let me say thank you with my whole body. Let me love it not because it stays, but because it leaves. And slowly, I started to live like that. Not every moment, not perfectly, but often enough to feel the ground beneath me again, often enough to pause in the middle of something small, a cup of tea, a breeze through the curtain, and feel the sacred weight of still having it. Part 3. Learning to hold and let go. By the final week, I no longer needed to remind myself to practice. The ritual had settled in. A quiet guest at the table of my mornings, needing no invitation, asking only for silence and a little time. I had imagined so many kinds of loss by then. Not just dramatic things, but the slow, ordinary erosions that life performs without permission. The way laughter fades in a room after someone leaves. The way clothes carry a scent until they don't. The way a beloved object becomes just another thing when your eyes stop lingering. By then, the fear had softened. What began as a rehearsal for tragedy had become something else entirely, a deepening of attention, an act of reverence. I had not become a monk. I still complained, still got distracted, still flinched at the thought of losing what I loved. But now, something had shifted underneath all that noise, a subtle readiness, a steadier kind of seeing. There were moments I thought the practice had failed me. I hadn't become immune to grief. I hadn't erased anxiety or stopped the spiral of wanting more. But that was never the point. The Stoics weren't offering immunity. They were offering clarity, a way to live in the presence of fragility without being crushed by it, a way to stand inside life, aware of its terms, and still say yes. What I found most surprising, as the 30th day came and went, was how gentle the transformation had been. No grand awakening, no sudden burst of enlightenment, just a quiet recalibration, a loosening of the grip, a slowing of the breath, a softness in the gaze. I had started the month looking for answers. I ended it with better questions. Not, how do I avoid loss? But how do I honor what I have before it's gone? Not how do I feel more grateful, but what keeps me from feeling grateful right now? I began to recognize how often I postponed presence, waiting for the perfect mood, the right lighting, the ideal version of myself. But the practice had shown me, the ordinary is not waiting. It is happening right now, and it will not pause for my permission. That was the most sobering part of the practice, not the grief I imagined, but the joy I had already missed. So I began to do less, but feel more. I talked slower, listened longer, let silence stretch without rushing to fill it. I didn't feel reborn, but I did feel returned to the pulse beneath the noise, returned to the simple truth that nothing is owed and everything is borrowed. And now, even after the 30 days have passed, the echoes remain. When I sip my coffee, I think of the hands that picked the beans, the truck that carried them, the cup I might drop one day and never replace. When I sit with someone I love, I let the silence hang a little longer, let the moment breathe, because it may not come again. And when something beautiful happens, when I catch a sunset or hear a song that moves me, I no longer try to hold it. I simply let it pass through, because that is what beauty is meant to do, not stay, but pass through. The Stoics taught that every possession is a loan, every breath, a gift with no guarantee of renewal. And now I live with that truth not as a burden, but as a compass. It points me back to this moment, to what is still here, to the quiet miracle of enough. I don't know if I'll continue the practice every single day, but I know I've been changed by it, not in the ways I expected, not tougher, not colder, but softer, more willing to notice, more willing to grieve, and in grieving, to cherish. That is the real gift of negative visualization, not fear, not detachment, but presence, a presence that trembles, not because it is weak, but because it understands what it stands to lose, and still it stands.